Welcome to History Uncovered, where the past comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let's dive into history together. It all began with 13 British colonies in North America, not just patches of land, but communities of people who had long stopped seeing themselves as mere subjects of the king. They built homes, developed trade, created local laws. And when the British Crown began imposing taxes, laws, and restrictions without asking their opinion, it wasn't just irritating. It became a deep internal conflict. People began asking, why should we obey a power that doesn't listen to us? By 1776, tensions had reached their peak. War had already begun, but there was no clear answer to the question, why are we fighting? Then, in June, a group of representatives from all 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia. Among them was a young but brilliant man, Thomas Jefferson. He was tasked with writing a document that would explain to the world why America wanted to be free. He sat down with a pen and wrote one of the most powerful texts in human history, the Declaration of Independence. On July 4th, 1776, the document was adopted. It declared that all men are created equal, that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government violates those rights, the people have the right to change it. This wasn't just a statement. It was a challenge to the very idea of monarchy. America said, we are no longer colonies, we are free states. And from that day, a new story began. But freedom isn't just words. It had to be built. The war continued, and only in 1783 did Britain recognize the independence of the United States. But then came the question, what next? How do you govern a country without a king? In 1787, representatives gathered again, not to fight, but to create the foundation of a new political system. Thus, the U.S. Constitution was born. This document didn't just describe how power would function, it declared power belongs to the people. It must be divided, legislative, executive, judicial. No one should hold too much power. This was a revolutionary idea for the 18th century, and it was written not for the elite, but for everyone. The Constitution became the foundation on which American democracy still stands. 2 years later, in 1789, the moment came to bring all of this to life. The people chose their first president. It was George Washington, the man who had led the army in war, who refused power when he could have become a king, and who now became the symbol of a new nation. His inauguration wasn't just a ceremony, it was the moment when an idea became a state, when a dream became a system, when the people saw for the first time that they truly could choose their own destiny. And if you ask why this matters, I'll say, because it was in those years that the idea was born that every person has the right to be free. That power must serve the people, that laws are not chains but protection. And this idea, born in America, spread to France, to Latin America, across the world. Because freedom is not an American value, it's a human one. Step by step, protest became revolution. Revolution became a state, and the state became an example for the world. And it all began when one man sat down, picked up a pen, and wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." When Washington took the oath in 1789, he didn't just become the head of a new government. He became the living proof that the revolution had not been in vain. He didn't seek power. He didn't want to be king. He wanted to serve. and that made him the perfect first president. People looked at him with respect, with hope, with faith that things would now be different. He understood that his role was not to rule, but to guide, not to command, but to unite. But the country was young, vulnerable, fragmented. The states argued among themselves. Each had its own interests, its own fears. Some wanted a strong central government. Others wanted more freedom for the regions. All of this had to be balanced. Washington wasn't alone. Around him were people who would also become legends. Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams. They argued, they disagreed, but they built. They built a system that could withstand the pressure of time. The early years were hard. There was no money, no army, no experience. But there was an idea. The idea that the people could govern themselves, that power is not a privilege, but a responsibility. And that idea became the driving force. The first laws appeared, the first institutions, the first elections. People learned to be citizens, learned to debate, to vote, to make decisions. It was new, it was difficult, but it was alive. And all of this happened while the world watched America with astonishment. Europe was used to kings, empires, hereditary rule. But here was a country where any person could become a leader, where laws were written not for the elite, but for everyone, where freedom was not a gift, but a right. And that inspired others. France, Latin America, even parts of Asia. Movements began to emerge everywhere saying, if they could do it, so can we. But America wasn't perfect. There were problems, contradictions. Slavery persisted. Women had no voice. Native peoples lost their lands. It was a country of dreams, but the dream was imperfect. And yet, it was a dream that kept moving forward. Gradually, step by step, people began to demand more equality, more justice, more participation. And every new step was a continuation of that same revolution begun in 1776. That's why we study this era not as a list of dates, but as the living fabric of human history, because it teaches us that freedom is not something given. It's something that must be defended. That democracy is not just voting, but constant dialogue. That history is not the past. It's a mirror of the present. And if we understand how it all began, we better understand where we're going. Thus ended the first chapter of American history. But its spirit lives on in every person who says, I have a right, in every society that fights for justice, in every voice that rises against tyranny. Because the true revolution, it's not in cannons, it's in ideas, in people, in freedom. And this story, it belongs to all of us. After George Washington became president, America began to rebuild itself. It wasn't just governance, it was the education of a nation. People were learning for the first time to be citizens. They were learning not just to obey, but to participate. It was a time when every voice, every vote, every decision mattered, and Washington understood. His role was not to rule, but to set an example. He refused a third term so as not to become a monarch. He stepped down voluntarily to prove that power is service, not a throne. But beneath this calm surface, internal struggle brewed. America was a country of ideas, and those ideas clashed. Some wanted strong government, others more freedom for the states. Some believed in industrialization, others in agriculture. Some wanted closer ties with Britain, others with France. And all of this gave rise to parties, conflicts, debates. But that was normal. That was alive. Because democracy is not silence, it's noise. its struggle, its movement. And all of this happened as the world was changing. France was undergoing its own revolution. Europe watched America with anxiety and interest, and America looked inward. It searched for its soul. It tried to understand who it was. And in that search, new ideas were born about human rights, freedom of speech, equality. But not everything was bright. Slavery continued. Women still had no voice. Native peoples lost their lands. It was a country of dreams, but the dream was imperfect. And yet, it was a dream that moved forward. People began to ask, if we fought for freedom, why isn't it for everyone? If we believe in equality, why doesn't it include women? If we're building democracy, why are some left outside its walls? These questions weren't answered immediately, but they were asked, and that was the most important thing, because the true revolution, it never ends. It continues in every generation, in every voice, in every step toward justice. America began to expand. People moved west, seeking new lands, building new towns. It was a spirit of adventure, but also a spirit of conquest. And again, contradiction. Freedom for some, loss for others. But history is never simple. It's always complex. And in that complexity, maturity is born. America was learning to be itself, learning to admit mistakes, learning to change. And if we look at all this today, we see not just dates, not just names. We see a path from idea to reality, from dream to system, from protest to nation. And that path, it's not just American, it's human. Because every people, every culture, every person at some point asks, who am I? What do I want? How can I live free? That's why we study this history, not to memorize facts, but to understand ourselves, to see how ideas become actions, how words become laws, how people, despite fear, move forward. And if we understand that, we become not just spectators of history, we become its continuation. Thus ended the first era of American life, but its spirit remained in every voice that demands justice,